Hi, my name is Laura Moffat.
Hi, my name is Kelly Moffat.
And we're the founders of Kirrin Finch. Yeah, I am from Scotland, so I grew up in Scotland, and I moved to the United States basically for college. So I played golf, so I had a scholarship. And then after college, I moved to New York for graduate school, and then did the whole, PhD in science thing, and then decided that I didn't want to do that. And then kind of went into marketing, and then that sort of evolved into being interested in starting a business.
So the straight path.
Yeah. Real winding path.
Yeah. I grew up in New Jersey, and so I actually went to university up in upstate New York, and then I came back to New York to be a teaching fellow. So it's kind of like Teach for America, but only in New York City. And so I taught actually in the public school system for 8 years, and then we kind of said, hey, we have this idea. What do we think? This is crazy. Neither of us know anything about fashion. And then we turned our crazy idea into a reality.
So I definitely have always been like a tomboy. I think that's for me is like the easiest word to describe my style. I know now people kind of use the word like dapper, which I think is kind of like more formal. I think I'm like sometimes can be describe myself as dapper, but I definitely lean towards more just kind of like tomboy. Like I really just like jeans and a t-shirt, or jeans and a shirt. I like literally wear jeans and a button-up shirt every day, and like a cool pair of shoes, and that is what I'm the most comfortable in. I never wanted to wear dresses growing up, and I was very uncomfortable, even as a little girl. Like my mom, I remember a very specific instant where my mom put a dress on me when I was like 5, and I had like a complete meltdown. Like for whatever reason, like I just felt uncomfortable. So yeah, I think I'm definitely a tomboy.
I had a similar experience like growing up. Every Wednesday, the compromise was I had library that day, so I would wear a dress that day, and all the other days I would be able to wear pants. And that was like kind of the compromise because all the other girls were wearing dresses, and I was just like, for whatever reason, like I knew that didn't apply to me, and that didn't make me feel comfortable. And I would say like now my style is definitely tends to be a little bit more formal than Laura's, but same in that kind of tomboy, dapper realm, but until I kind of realized that was an option for me, I really didn't care. I just kind of wore whatever, right? It's fashion and style. It wasn't something that like I felt mattered to me because I didn't matter to that.
Terrible. Which is why we started the company, but I think I never wanted to go shopping because I always felt literally horrendous afterwards. But I never really understood why I felt terrible afterwards. Like I just kind of was like, oh, I don't like shopping, and it wasn't until like I started to think more about my style or think about why it wasn't available that I started to realize that it didn't exist. But I think like for the most part, my experience is I'd go into stores, either wouldn't fit me because it was like too small, because basically American size is like, don't even reach the average women's size in America. So like I'd be like literally at the bottom of the pile, like pulling out the last size. So that didn't make me feel good. And then second of all, like everything was like super frilly and feminine, and I didn't understand like why did I feel bad? And like why was my style not represented? And then I would see stuff in the men's department, I'd be like, oh, that's kind of what I want to wear, and then I would try on and it wouldn't fit either. So then it was like this totally demotivating experience because there was nothing, like nowhere, like neither department like worked. And then I think less so in New York, but I think sometimes like sales associates can be, depending on where you go, I think less so in New York because people are just like, okay, get it, like gender fluidity, everyone shops everywhere, not a big deal anymore. But definitely a few years ago, people would be like, ma'am, the women's department is upstairs. And I'd be like, yep, I'm leaving the store right now. So, yeah, it was terrible experience.
Yeah, I remember very distinctly the first time I went into a store to specifically buy like men's jeans, and it was this like I was terrified because not so much about the buying process, but I was like, oh, what do? I have to try them on. Because I didn't know, like from a sizing perspective, I had no idea what size I would be. So then I had to go to the dressing room, and thankfully the person that was there was super, super receptive, and they're like, let me help you, and they were like totally into it. But I went to school in upstate New York, and this was when I was in university, and this is like it's upstate, like for lack of a better term, it's not as progressive as New York City typically is. So that experience could have gone both ways, and have had that experience go both ways in New York City too. So it's not like it's New York is this bubble where everything is perfect. But it was a very liberating experience for me to be able to go in and, like, granted, I look back now and they fit terribly, but it was like, oh, finally something that allows me to express myself in a way that makes me feel more comfortable.
Yeah, like I lived in Los Angeles for my undergraduate, and so Los Angeles is a very kind of like sceney place, and it's like a very like feminine focused place, I think. And so like for a while I was wearing like skirts and like little tops because that's what everyone else is wearing, and I felt better to fit in with people than to feel like an outsider and have to dress differently. And I look back at some of the outfits I was wearing in college, and I'm just like, oh my god. I mean, I think people feel that way in general, regardless of what they're wearing, because I've seen Kelly's outfits in college. She was probably the most unfashionable person.
Thank you.
You were really unfashionable.
It's a good thing we started a fashion brand.
Yeah.
It really came out of our own personal frustration of all of a sudden like realizing, okay, this is an experience that's really uncomfortable for us, and really going from that moment of like, oh, this kind of sucks, to having some clarity around why was it that this was uncomfortable and why this wasn't working, and then being like, well, there's a problem, we're two relatively intelligent people, we could solve this. And then went about the steps of being like, okay, well, we need to like educate ourselves about fashion. Okay, fine. So like I took a bunch of courses at FIT, like Laura has a background in marketing. So like, and we gradually went from like knowing nothing to, knowing lots more now.
Yeah, I think we both came to this because I think in hindsight, like we didn't really realize how bad it was until we both talked about it. And then as we talked about it as a shared experience and with other people actually, it was like, oh yeah, that doesn't exist. I have so many, or I did until I gave them to Salvation Army. I have so many like button-up shirts like from men's stores that I literally wore like once or twice because I really wanted them to fit, but then they really didn't because I have hips. So it was like to suddenly realize like, oh, why doesn't this exist? And there was a few brands like kind of like, beginning to kind of touch in that space, but no one had really like taken like a huge step forward. And I don't know, we just kind of thought like we should do it. And we weren't like, neither of us were like super passionate about clothes. Like it wasn't like we were these designers that already like were really passionate about clothes. It was like, oh, let's shift our design focus over here. Like we really looked at it from like a business perspective, and obviously from like a personal perspective. Like,
yeah, totally selfish.
If it doesn't, it's like basically let's make a clothing company where we can basically have clothes for ourselves and our friends, right? And that's kind of still how we look at it, honestly. Like if we can make something that both of us want to wear, like for the most part, I think there's a decent sized audience for that. Yeah, it's interesting. So when we first decided, okay, we're going to do this, we were like, okay, let's come up with some names. And so we're like brainstorming all these different names or whatever. And Kirrin Finch was one of the, because we'd always thought like, we identify as tomboys. There's a lot of people out there that are tomboys. Whether they're gay or not, it doesn't really matter. So we're kind of thinking about like tomboys, like is there something that we can do with this? And then I'm from Scotland and Kelly's from the US. So we Scout Finch, like an American, Georgina Kirrin's is a UK book series, and so we just kind of put the two names together to form Kirrin Finch, and we kind of like put that name aside for basically like
I committed to it initially.
I was just like, I'm one of these people like I literally can just iterate and iterate and iterate forever and ever and ever. So for the next 9 months, we like literally iterated on so many different names. And I was like, no, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's it. Anyway, regardless, long story short, we then did some market research with some other names, and ultimately we came back to that name. But it literally was like one of the first names that we came up with. And I think it still rings true because I think, when you read about these tomboys, for the most part in like younger adult literature, they're very free and they're not worried about what they're wearing, and they're just playing and they're just doing whatever they want for the most part. And then, because you don't really realize when you're that age that there are these constraints, like society hasn't quite like put its like pressure on you and told you like not to do these things. So just having that like attitude of like just being yourself, I think really rings true for the company as well.
And I think a lot of people hear it and they think of it as like actually a person, like Kirrin Finch. It almost sounds like a person's name, and there's an association of like, oh, you know, with that kind of like character in literature, it's like, you know, it embodies who they were. I also happened to be a librarian when I was teaching, so that also I kind of got jazzed about that.
We have distinct roles, but sometimes that just goes out of the window because we're running a small business. So my official role is I'm the director of marketing. So basically, you know, I'm doing all our online stuff, so website, social media, email, you know, search engine optimization, like all the various things that are about like digital marketing, because we are an e-commerce brand, so we do the majority of our business online. But I also do other things such as shipping and fulfillment and design and then shipping, you know, logistics, operational stuff. Kelly does most of the operational stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, so basically my official title is Director of Operations. So I spend a lot of time, for example, right now when we're in production, like going literally into the factory. I mean, we're very lucky, we manufacture in Midtown Manhattan, so I spend a lot of time on the train back and forth into there. You know, sometimes it's dropping off supplies, grading and marking, all those kind of things that are actually at our fingertips, which is really, really fortunate. I mean, there's obviously pros and cons to manufacturing locally and manufacturing overseas and whatever, but it allows me to literally be in the factory speaking to people. So I do a lot of that kind of stuff. I manage our events and when we do pop-ups and that kind of stuff. So it just depends. And as Laura said, right, like any small business, it doesn't matter if you're in fashion or running a general store or whatever it is, it's all hands on deck, right? So
generally, I'm comfortable behind the computer screen, and Kelly's comfortable in front of people, and that's kind of how our roles get devised. I do a lot of the customer service, but it's like behind the computer screen. She's doing the customer service that's like people facing.
It's pretty good. Pretty good explanation. We've learned so much.
I think like in the very beginning, our biggest reservation was, oh, we don't have a fashion background, like how can we do this? I think that was like initially like, how can we do this? And I think like in hindsight, in some ways I think it was easier than I thought it would be, and in other ways I think it's like harder than I thought it would be, because I think it was easier, like I think it's relatively simple to start doing something in fashion. Like there's plenty of resources. It used to be that you know, there was these like secret directories where you couldn't find factories, and you know, you had to like know someone, and you know, now there's sort of online resources, and there's easier ways to find a pattern maker and a factory, and there's factories that do small minimums, and so that part was less difficult than I thought it would be. But I think some of the stuff, like the quality control, like we don't come from a fashion background, so like knowing what to look for, like should it be 12 stitches per inch or should it be 15 stitches per inch, and being able to have like a discerning eye for that stuff. And that's definitely been a learning curve. I mean, we're definitely, you know,
we're always learning.
We're always learning. I think you're always learning regardless, but I think some of those more like fine detailed points of like, you know, what goes into a garment, like what fusible do you use? Do you use this way or that way? You know, just not necessarily having the like knowledge from being at a design school to know that has been challenging. I've forgotten the question.
What did we find most challenging?
That was challenging. I think the other challenge that I think we face just on a daily basis from a marketing and brand perspective is that, you know, we design clothes for people that sort of identify as tomboy or androgynous or looking for kind of a menswear inspired look, and with that becomes like a niche market, right, in some ways. And the best way to build a brand where people can like truly like adore you and love you is to actually go after a super, super niche market, because you literally are basically building like brand advocates. But I think with that becomes like, is the market size big enough to sustain like financial success? And I think that's where a lot of the kind of queer focused brands have really struggled, because in choosing that market, you're saying, okay, yes, there's an unmet need, but inherently that market is smaller than the sort of general mass market. So we're always fighting this battle of like, how do we get a bigger audience but not lose our kind of core audience? And it's literally the constant battle we have when we're writing copy on the website, when we're developing product. It's like this tension point between like make money, satisfy the audience, and they don't always necessarily like agree with each other. What would you say?
Yeah, no, I think you've hit on the major issues. I think saying that, like, figuring out how to make a garment, I think we got very lucky because we had some really amazing mentors, which, I mean, even with that, you know, I remember the first time I went in to do some grading and marking. And first of all, I'd never even heard of what grading and marking was. I couldn't really understand why one was different than the other. And then we went in and we were talking about, like, changing the color and how this was going to do this. And now, literally, this past week, I was, like, going in and doing some match lines and, like, having some, like, a conversation with the guy that we work with. And it was just like, oh, like, I finally knew what I was talking about. And then he sent me an email about something. And I was like, oh, all this time I finally figured it out, and then he throws me a question, and then I was like, I don't even know what you're asking me right now, Paul. But you know, it's like a matter of learning, and each day also being able to acknowledge, okay, like, I need help with this, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think we're lucky because in the very beginning we knew that we needed help with fashion, and so we applied to become part of the Brooklyn Fashion Design Accelerator, and we were accepted. And I think what was really nice about that place is they have a sample room there, and they have a pattern maker and, like, a production person, and we've worked with those two people literally through all of our development and all of our sample making. So yes, if we hadn't had that, I think it would have been more challenging because they've been great. We literally have an office space right there. We're part of a sort of accelerator that has other different brands, so like menswear, jewelry, homeware. So we were lucky that we had people that we could say, you know, where are you getting your labels from? Like, what thread should we use with our, you know, buttons? Like, what's a good factory? And I think when you're sort of a solo entrepreneur or just like a couple of people that don't necessarily come from the fashion background, you might not necessarily have those contacts. So I think anyone that's starting a business, is really great to find, like, mentors or a network of people that can kind of, like, help you, because you obviously can't research everything online.
Right. I actually think it ended up sometimes also benefiting us because we were naive. So, like, when we wanted to do, like, 17 different styles to begin with, like, had we had any idea how difficult that would have been, like, literally after we went through the whole process, Tara, one of our mentors, was like, you never would have done this if you knew what you had to do to make all of those styles. And I was like, yes, you're absolutely right. But we did because we wanted to make it, right? So you figured it out.
Yeah, now I see ourselves being a bit different, because we'll look at stuff now and be like, oh, that's going to be really difficult to produce. Like, our factory's going to charge us more for that or whatever. So we have sort of started getting into that mentality about what's, you know, balancing, like, what's great for design versus, like, what's great for what's going to get what's production logistically and sort of financially really feasible.
Which is probably a good place to be balancing.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we don't look at any trends things, because honestly those things are incredibly expensive, the subscriptions for them. I know at one point Kelly was using it a little bit when she had a class.
It's amazing, really interesting.
It's an amazing resource, but I think honestly the way that we look for trends is we look at what people are wearing on the streets, like what people are wearing in magazines or, you know, online resources. Like, those are where, and especially we live in New York, so New York is always a bit ahead of the curve. So if you, like, start to see people on the streets, like, you're like, oh, I keep seeing that, you know, that thing or that, like, item, you realize, like, New York is already, like, ahead of the trend curve as it is. So I think that makes it easier. The other thing for us is we are obviously making, like, menswear inspired women's wear. So we are constantly just looking at, like, menswear, right? Looking at what are the trends in menswear, like, and retail too, like going to stores, looking through the racks. We'll do, like, sort of competitive, like, shopping and go to the stores one day and literally just, like, go into whatever various stores, like APC, Club Monaco, like opening ceremony, whatever, and just, like, kind of see, like, what's out there. Like, I love also looking at fabrics, so I get a lot of my inspiration from going to the fabric shows and just, like, seeing, like, what fabrics are we seeing, like, over time. Like, there's definitely been, for the last, like, year and a half, I would say, like, a big push towards, like, prints and, like, floral prints, and that's maybe beginning to go away, but you see what you see with when they're producing the fabrics, that's essentially, like, setting the trends for what's going to be out there, because they've also done all of their own research to determine what fabrics they should produce based on, like, Pantone colors and, like, this and that, whatever that goes into that magic box of, like, trend stuff. But I think just keeping an eye on the street and, like, what people are wearing, like, is honestly, you know, the best thing, because we want to produce things that, you know, people want to wear every day. You know, we're not aiming for the runway. We're not making couture.
I think also one of our goals is basically like there are all these kind of iconic pieces out there. Like this is a good example, right? Like a buffalo check that like you see as a staple. You look at J. Crew's catalog 10 years ago and you look at it today, right? And this is the kind of thing that you've seen as iconic menswear, and it hasn't been accessible to our customers. And so allowing for them to actually find it and go to a place, and instead of having that experience where we would go into a dressing room and be like, oh my God, I'm gonna make this fit me. I mean, like, come on. I finally stopped purchasing men's button-ups because they're not gonna fit me. They are not made for me, and especially not right now with 2 babies in my belly. But so, you know, it's just like, it's allowing that access where they weren't able to get.
Yeah, and I think our goal is to make timeless designs, so we don't necessarily want to be always following trends because trends tend to come and go. And so, you know, we are focused on being more ethical and sustainable. And so if you focus on trends, like that stuff's getting thrown away in 2 years, right? If you look at H&M, Forever 21, like all that stuff goes into the landfill. Zara, every year they're just filling up the landfill. So if you focus on things that are classics.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, like, especially older generation, they're like, oh, look at Ellen DeGeneres. Have you reached out to her? And we're like, Ellen DeGeneres does not even know who we are, although she's a pretty cool chick. I would love to be her friend, love her to wear her clothes. She also has her own line. But there's a lot of kind of younger celebrities that have been pushing the boundaries that you see. Like, you see some of the women's soccer team that was like, you know, wearing all of a sudden these like very public appearances, like wearing tuxes and kind of breaking these boundaries of what women typically have been perceived of, like what you should wear, and especially in a formal setting. And that's kind of a tricky, nuanced experience. And I remember the first time I wore like a suit to our wedding, and like how like liberating that was. Just like, no, like for me, I don't want to wear a dress, and that's okay. And I'm sure it was very similar for them to be able to express themselves in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a tough question, and I think people ask us that all the time. And Kelly's is right, like they'll send us an email and they'll be like, hey, I just had this thought. I was like, why don't you reach out to Ellen DeGeneres and get her to wear your clothes?
Yeah.
I'm just like,
there's a few other people that probably.
But anyway, Ellen is incredibly stylish. I love her style. I think she wears really nice stuff. I think she's very lucky to have probably a tailor that makes everything for her, so that it looks perfect.
I'm happy to reach out to Abby Wambach as well and have her wear her stuff, you know?
I think Ellen Page is also someone I like her for a number of different reasons, because I think she really just is herself. And she's not incredibly stylish, but I think like she kind of rocks the like tomboy, like cool thing. And
but I think it's acknowledging that is incredibly stylish, right? Like that's her doing her thing.
I think the reality is there isn't that many. The reason why we always struggle with this question, and we always end up back at the same sort of 4 or 5 people, is there isn't a lot of people in the public eye that are recognized for wearing something more dapper or like tomboy style. You always see, you know, people go to award shows and like Rihanna wore like a suit, and it's like, yeah, she wore a suit with like 6-inch heels,
right?
You know, and it's like, whoa, like menswear inspired, and you're like, not really.
I mean, yes, but like for a moment as opposed to a lifestyle, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of women, like Kate Winslet wore that suit for whatever it was, the Vogue shoot or something, and she looked amazing, but that's not her everyday style. So for someone whose everyday style is, you know, kind of the look that we're looking for, there aren't too many people out there. And the fact that we have a hard time coming up with the answer, I think, says that there isn't like necessarily this one person that everyone's going to for style inspiration. I think to build on that point, because actually I think the place where you do see a lot of that is through like the fashion bloggers. So there's obviously like a big movement now through like blogging and Instagram and Tumblr of these like women or people that maybe identify as like genderqueer who are really doing amazing looks with like menswear and androgynous wear. And so we'll definitely like look at that. And those people are, I think, doing a great job of like creating visibility. But it's not necessarily like visibility in mass media. It's like visibility within like a very small like sphere of Instagrammers, right?
But it's interesting because I think that there has been a trend of general acceptance within like general society, and as a result, like some of these Instagram famous people have actually gone on to do like to walk for like some of the menswear brands during New York Fashion Week last year. Like you see, like She's a Jen and like
Red Dove. Yeah, you know, they're walking for big menswear brands like on the runway, so you know they have like an androgynous look, so you know they're being kind of, but it's hard to know, like are they walking because they have like this, they're like almost like as if they're men, right? So it's like it's not necessarily, the clothes that they're wearing aren't necessarily designed for women, so then you know, how do you reconcile that?
I think it's tricky because the fit of many of those brands work for a very, like, we're talking like, you know, 5% of people that perhaps identify as women or trans or genderqueer, and it's tricky because if you don't have broader shoulders and whatever,
tall, skinny,
like they're not making those clothes for you, so that presents obviously the same problem where we go back to square one of why we started this company. This fit is important, and part of actually what makes you look good, right, is that your clothes fit you. It's not just that you're wearing cool looking clothes, it's that they are meant for your size body. And I think that there's like obviously also like the way it's cut, but also there's a push towards more inclusivity through sizing, through just generally, and that's obviously also really important. We do sizing 2 to 18 for our shirts, and that, like, for a small brand, taking on that much inventory is you know, tricky, and we want to continue to push that boundary. We're coming out with some pants and we're doing 0 to 18, so like, you know, it's a matter of being able to grow as a company so that we can continue to help those people. Well, seeing as I knew nothing, all of them, I like came back and it was funny. Like, I remember like I took this course and I was learning just about like fabrics and stuff. And I came back with my little eyeglass and I was like all excited. And
she had this like crazy little, I don't even know what it's called. And she was like, I'm gonna like look at the fabric weave every time we buy a fabric. She's literally never used it.
No, that's not true. I didn't know her first fabric
show. I don't even know where it is. She had this, like, it was like this little crazy eyeglass that she would be like down looking at the fabric, and she'd be like, oh, the weft is like this, or the whatever it's called, the warp is like this. And I'd be like, it looks good.
Right. So I think that there's like understanding of like technical stuff, which is really important, because then you at least like have some concept, right? So, and then there's the reality of, well, how actually we look at fabric now when we choose it. My pick glass, I think, is what it is actually called. Thank you very much. That is sitting in my top drawer at the office.
Should use it.
Yeah. Has not necessarily gotten as much use, although I'm sure my professor would be very, very disappointed. But understanding literally like warp and weft, like, had no idea, right? Like, I also took a course in stitching and came back to the office with, you know, I was like, okay, these are all the stitches and now I know how we're gonna make a shirt. Well, needless to say, we're not using many of those stitches. Most of people don't use half of those, but just understanding that, like, I didn't even know that there was more than one, right?
It's true.
So
I also took a merchandising course at FIT, and which I think was probably more helpful than your stitching class.
I disagree.
So that was helpful. I learned, because I think what was good about the classes is it was a place where we didn't feel intimidated to literally be like, I don't know what grading is. Like, I literally have no idea, and like just to ask the questions. And I'm like, we're older students, like, so they're, you know, there were younger kids in there. I was like asking questions. I'm like, what is grading? What is marking? How do you do this? Like, because I'm like, I'm paying for this.
Right.
Like, I gotta know. It's not like when you're like a young kid and you're like, I think continuing education, like, people are just like so excited.
So underrated.
So that provided a space for us to like build like a baseline so that we didn't, you know, so that we had a bit of credibility, because when, especially going to the factories, like if you don't have like a certain like baseline of understanding, they're gonna take you for a ride, right? Yeah. They'd be like, oh, that's $100 a piece. You'd be like, I don't have any reference for that, so okay. Or, we're gonna do this. If you don't know the answers, then I think it's really hard to have a good conversation with your factory or your pattern maker or whatever, because they're in a business too. So I think you have to be knowledgeable. And as we've become more knowledgeable, I think we've done a better job of like finding better factories, like negotiating better, like speaking up for what we want, like what's deal breakers, what's not a deal breaker. Like we had no idea in the beginning. So I think the more that you keep learning, the product can get better as well.
Do you remember when we went to our first fabric show? And
so embarrassing.
It was really ridiculous. The like
this was like a defining moment because it was so bad. We were both so nervous. I think it was Premier Vision or Tex World, one of those. It was at like Pier 94 or 54 or something. So we're like, okay, we can do this, and we're both like really nervous.
Pep talk.
Because we had no idea. We didn't know that you get the swatches for free.
Well, not every company gives you swatches, but the majority.
So we like watched a couple of people like go into the booth, and we're like, okay, let's do this. And we would like look at the fabrics and pretend that we knew. Oh, that's nice. Mm-hmm. That's nice. But then Kelly's defining moment was
I can't remember if he was asking me if I wanted like headers or if I wanted the cards. And he kept being like, okay, so do you want the whole header like sent to you? And I was like, yeah.
He basically was saying like we were like, okay, we pulled out the card and we were looking at it, and she's like, oh, I'd like to get a sample or something, right? I think we maybe used the word sample. So he was like, well, do you want headers or do you want sample yardage? And Kelly was like, yes. She just kept saying yes, and he was like, no, but do you want headers or sample yardage? She was like, yes.
Because I did not feel like I could say, I don't know what you're saying to me.
Right, so clearly we wanted the header because we didn't want to purchase any yardage yet, but we just didn't know that there was a difference. So we just kept saying yes and hoping that something would happen. And I don't remember what happened. I think he eventually was just like, okay, you guys are crazy. He's like, I'm giving you some headers and we'll move on from there. But that was pretty bad.
That was a pretty bad moment.
Then we had to regroup in the corner and figure out like what the difference was so that we could move on to the next one. We've come a long way.
Yes.
So we started out with button-up shirts because I think number one reason was we did some market research and we asked, friends of friends, people that we felt were in our target audience, like what's the one item that you are looking for? And in our survey, small market research survey, that came up as kind of the top item. Now this was like 2 or 3 years ago, so I think there's a lot more button-up shirts available. And then also I think that's sort of not like the tomboy signature look, but for women who don't wear dresses, I think a button-up shirt is really versatile. Like it can be dressed up, it can be dressed down. It certainly was what we were wearing, so I think we felt comfortable starting there. So we've been doing button-up shirts. We, I think, started development of them like a year ago. So they're really challenging. I think the difference between pants and button-ups, button-ups, there's definitely like a little bit more wiggle room in terms of like fit. Like it doesn't have to like literally sit right against your skin, but like pants, there's not a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of components to it that we didn't really think necessarily about. You've obviously,
have sense though.
Yeah, we have sense. There's the waist, there's the hips, there's the calf, there's the length, there's the like, do you want it to be like up, lower, down, up, do you want it to be tapered, straight? What material you use? You use stretch or not stretch? So it's been fun though. I mean, we're coming out with them in a couple of weeks. We've already had some people interested in them. We've done some pre-orders already, and so that's kind of the next challenge. And I think when it comes to our customer base, pants are really tough, especially if you're wearing jeans. Sure, you've got a skinny pair of jeans and you've got stretch in them and it's not a big deal. I think you can get that a lot of different places, but I think when you want to wear something that might be a little bit more formal or something to work, I think it's really challenging because you're either kind of like in that weird like super skinny or like boot cut or straight, and like the materials might not necessarily be right. And then men's pants have a lot more cool like textured materials. So we're coming out with basically kind of chinos, khakis that have really like interesting like colorful details inside the pockets and things that you tend to see in menswear that you don't see in women's wear. And then in terms of additional development, we're making a couple more shirt styles. So we're kind of expanding from our range that we have right now. We're pulling together a dress shirt, which is longer, more like formal for work. And then iterating on, like we're making a mandarin collar shirt. So just expanding our offering, some hats, We're working on a blazer right now. I think the goal is ultimately to be able to put together a full out that you could literally shop at Kirrin Finch for your entire outfit. And sure, that's not going to happen tomorrow, but I think that's the ultimate goal, that you would be able to buy almost everything that you would ever need for our customer base from us. And we're just going to continue working towards that, I think. And there's always development is expensive, so you can only do development for a certain amount of time, because you have to build up an amount of cash to be able to do that. So we're kind of at the point now where we're like now beginning to go back into development and put some cash into that, with the hope of like returning that over in time.
Yeah. I forgot what I was gonna say. Hold that thought. I know what I was gonna say.
What?
Part of the reason why, like, when we think about, like, we were in development for pants for a year, is because fit is so important to us. So we do something that apparently is unconventional. We had no idea. We thought everyone would do it this way. Basically, we make a sample, right? Then we test it like with our fit model and, do all that kind of. And then we've had these fit events for every time when we released our shirts and when we released our pants. And so we invite 30 or 40 people or whatever, and we have them try them on with us and our pattern maker, and we interview them and we look at what is going on their body and what's happening and what do they like, what do they not like, and then take that information and then make adjustments as a result. And so, because as we said, right, pants are tricky, as all these people that go to fashion schools know, that it took us like 2 or 3 iterations of it, because we were like, okay, well, we're really not like, it was good, but we weren't happy with exactly where we were. And you're forgetting we're working on a maternity shirt.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. Selfish.
If you've ever tried to find maternity wear for people that don't wear big flowy dresses, the options out there are terrible.
It's either a tent,
or a lot of stretchy stuff. So no one's really taking on that opportunity. There was a brand that was, but it didn't continue or whatever. So we're gonna make a maternity shirt, because if you go online and you try to find like good examples, it doesn't exist. I think it's inherently challenging, because as someone who's pregnant, it's like, are you supposed to be feminine? And so like it's very, I think, difficult to figure out like what that look is supposed to be, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily think that there are masculine identified women that are going to be pregnant, right?
And it really kind of blows some people's minds. Like, sometimes you'll see people look and like do this double take to me, and they're like, I'm very confused. You have short hair, you're wearing a button up, but you're pregnant.
Yeah.
Like, what? And it's like, well, okay, like, the reality is you could make a baby regardless of, you can't just make a baby, but you can certainly carry a baby regardless of how you kind of identify in that it's, feminine, masculine spectrum.
Yeah, so I think the goal is just always to be thinking about how can we provide options for people that can't necessarily get it from like the mainstream fashion places.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think in some ways still being around. I know that's kind of crazy to say that, but we've all read the statistics that say like most businesses fail after 1 year, and it takes people 3 years to make a profit. And I think also knowing like how many queer owned or people that target like niche markets like these go out of business really quickly. I think the fact that we're still growing, we're seeing like month over month growth from a sales perspective. We have a lot of repeat customers. I think that might be one of the things I feel the most proud about, is that we have a lot of repeat customers and loyal customers that come back time and time again. And so that gives me a lot of hope, because it sort of validates that there is a market opportunity for us, and that we just need to keep continuing. We just have to continue down the path. But yeah, being around after 2.5 years and still growing, I'm like, it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's impressive, especially for someone that's a small business, like targeting a niche market.
I'm proud we're still married.
Yes.
Working with your spouse is a challenge.
That's a whole other course.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe psychology, some sort of psychology course. Marriage 101.
I'm really proud also that like there have been so many, we've been very fortunate. We've gotten a lot of really positive press. But like from these like mainstream places like Fast Company, right? And like Cosmopolitan and like these like places where it never even would have occurred to me that they would have an audience that is, you know,
like Mary Claire came and interviewed us.
Literally.
It's like my mom is reading Mary Claire. Clearly, no one from Mary Claire then went and bought Kirrin Finch items because it's a completely different demographic. But we were in Mary Claire, and everyone's moms emailed us on Facebook. They were like, "Oh my God, who's Laura and Kelly?" It wasn't like people of our age group. It was literally people's moms were like opening up Mary Claire and like saying, "Oh my God, Laura and Kelly are in Mary Claire." It's like, you know, I think it speaks to where there is like this mainstream trend for like androgynous, you know, gender fluid, gender neutral, like unisex, like these various like terms. Like there is, mainstream is starting to notice. And so we just happen to be around, you know, it's kind of like right place, right time. But yeah, it's cool to be recognized in the mainstream.
But it's not even, I mean, like the recognition is cool, like for our brand, but the fact that we are a part of this group that's pushing this boundary.
Sure, to be part, to be included.
And to make the solution, right? Because like there's lots of people that see a problem in the world, regardless of what the problem is, right? But taking and saying, okay, like there's an issue, what can we do to help be the solution?
Well, I would say about 80 to 90% of our customers are based in the US. Maybe another 10% are based in Canada, and then maybe another 10% are based in Australia. Like those are our three big markets. I would say, you know, very much similar style to us. You know, probably would identify as tomboy or androgynous or dapper. You know, clearly not. Most people would not consider themselves to be like feminine and wearing dresses, although we do have a lot of customers that are, you know, comfortable in a button-up shirt one day and then maybe comfortable in a dress the other day, because a button-up shirt is not necessarily, you know, doesn't mean that you can't wear a dress tomorrow. But I think the majority of our customers identify in some sort of either as androgynous or a tomboy, and are very comfortable, look to menswear, like really like menswear but can't find the fit. So they're looking for the style and aesthetic of menswear, but for a fit that takes into account like your boobs or your hips or you know, shorter. So that's, I think at a very generic level, like how people would describe themselves, or how we would describe them.
I think that's a good. Often like professionals, like people that like wear this to like they need something that they can wear to work, right? So it's something that like makes them feel like that is inappropriate, but they can also, you know, wear it out with their friends and feel comfortable and at a barbecue or whatever. We like when we first kind of wrote our business plan and thought about what Kirrin Finch was going to be, we had to, we're going to do like recycled packaging and like, you know, do some stuff, and like we really honestly didn't know the extent of where we could go within sustainable fashion. And we were really lucky because when we joined the Fashion Accelerator, the Brooklyn Fashion Accelerator that Laura was talking about before, it's like it has allowed us to push the boundaries, and so many things that we didn't know were even like within the sustainable and ethical sphere. So from like from a material standpoint, right, we think a lot about what we're using and things like upcycling. So when you make a button-up shirt, right, there's lots of little kind of pieces, and maybe your marker, you have like, you know, an extra to like a foot or whatever here. So we'll make pocket squares and bow ties out of that extra fabric. We make pockets on some of our other shirts and on our t-shirts, and so just getting creative about the ways that we can make sure we're using the resources that we have. We also do a lot of support within the community, so we're targeting from like a ethical standpoint of women and LGBTQ community. For example, we do like a film screening and like collect donations for the LA Forney Center, and once a year we do that, and have done some other like fundraisers and donate to the Human Rights Campaign for silent auctions and that kind of stuff. So it's just, I just think that in general, like it's encouraging to me that there are more brands in this space,
right.
And people are starting to, make different things, right? Like there's shoes, there's shirts, there's suits, there needs to be options, right? And we don't live in a vacuum, and the best thing that could happen for our company, right, is competition and lots of other brands doing really cool stuff, because, we want options too for ourselves. It's not like, it'll take us a while to get to shoes at least.
I think the only thing that we haven't really talked about is, I think we were talking about this earlier, about how, mainstream fashion brands tend to kind of like grab on to like whatever is trendy right now, and then they run with it for a year or two and then they move on. So clearly like mainstream fashion brands are now grabbing on to like sort of unisex, gender neutral, whatever. Like, H&M came out with their unisex line, Zara, whatever, and a lot of them got flack for it, because I think, a lot of people said, they're basically just like big sweatshirts or big t-shirts, because ultimately if you're designing for like completely different body types, it's really hard to make something fit really, really well. So I'm not sure what will happen with that. Like, will it just be a fad that like passes, and then the small businesses that are truly doing it because they're passionate about it and because they're trying to meet an unmet need will just continue on? I just worry that what will happen to like people like us who are, small business, just trying to like make it day by day, if we have to compete with like Zara or H&M or John Lewis like in the UK, or Selfridges or whatever. Like, what happens to our Forever 21? Like, I just hope that people can see through the fact that that's just a trend, and that we can just continue to keep like moving forward and like satisfying like our customer base the best that we can.
I was thinking about, so we have someone that's modeled for us and also as a friend, and was helping us out with a pop-up at the W fashion show this past week, and they were saying, one of the things that they really love when they're around our brand, when someone tries on that shirt, and it's that moment that you see in their face, literally it's like, wow, this was made for me. Mm-hmm. And I want there to be more of that for the people that our brand speaks to. So
okay, mic drop.
Boom.